In today's video, we're going to talk about arguably the best value full-frame camera on the market. This is the LUMIX S5 Mark II. Let's get into it. Welcome back, folks. My name's Shane. I have 4 LUMIX S5 Mark IIs. That's right, I have a couple of different YouTube channels, and anytime I'm doing a multi-camera setup, this is my camera of choice. I also use it in situations where I need a really great run and gun camera with great ergonomics, active cooling, and all the bells and whistles that you would expect from a more expensive camera. As of right now, in 2025, the LUMIX S5 Mark II might represent the best value full-frame camera on the market. There's nothing really close to it at its price point. And we also have the LUMIX S9 over here, which is my favorite travel camera, just based on its physical size, and it has the same sensor as the S5 Mark II, giving us basically exactly the same results. But if I want something that's completely bulletproof to the elements here in the hot Australian summer, then I'm taking the S5 Mark II or X. I realized the other day that I haven't actually spoken about the S5 Mark II in quite some time, and it's not because I didn't want to, it's just because I'm always using them. Behind me in the studio all the time, you can usually see 2 of them right here. They're actually just out of shot. But I have 4 of these, and I'm going to talk about why I chose to get these cameras and why they're sticking around long term. Now, even after testing the LUMIX S1RII Mark II, I have no plans on getting rid of these cameras. The price difference, at least here in Australia, doesn't make any sense for some of the trade-offs with that camera. Now, while the S1RII Mark II has exceptional image quality and that 8K or even the 4K image looks beautiful because it's oversampled, there's not a huge difference when you're shooting in 4K or 6K up against this. The S5 Mark II is still a really great camera. Now, there's a couple of differences between this and the X, and I'll talk about that coming up, but I think this is just the best value camera for most people who want to get into doing YouTube, who might want a more serious video camera that you can let record all day without any sort of overheating issues. It has the great phase hybrid autofocus system that I prefer over just about every camera. And I'm using the X in the studio here, but you could replace it with an S5 Mark II, and these are the sort of autofocus results you can get, so it works really well. Before shooting with the S5 Mark II, I actually had 4 original S5s, and they're still fantastic cameras. If you're mostly a photographer or you're doing handheld work and you want more of an organic sort of IBIS experience, that camera is still really great, but it comes at the shortcoming of not having good autofocus. And I think if you're somewhat serious about maybe making YouTube videos, having autofocus is a lifesaver. It really is. It saves the setup time. You can just hit record and you know it's going to work, which is excellent. So that's where this really got the win. There's a few other reasons why I ended up sort of trading all of them in for the S5 Mark II. Active cooling is amazing. Not that I had too much of an issue with overheating on the original S5, but it does have recording restrictions, and sometimes I might be rolling for over an hour, and I've never had these overheat indoors or out, so that's awesome. I love the fact that the S5 Mark II also gives us dual SD card slots here, which, while slower than CF Express Type B, you can use this with really cheap media. Even V30 cards will work all the way up to 6K, which is crazy. So if you want to shoot in 6K, that's another one of the benefits of this camera. And if you're using any sort of cine lenses, you get all the Filmmaker tools like anamorphic D-squeeze, shutter angle, and all the rest of the stuff the LUMIX cameras have had for years. So for that, it's awesome. And also with the IBIS system, you can fully tailor it to third-party lenses. So if you're using, say, a super wide-angle lens that might not have any terminals on the back, or even an anamorphic lens, you can set up the IBIS accordingly and set the millimeter length and all that kind of stuff and get great results handheld with this camera. And for those kind of scenarios, this is a no-brainer. Not having any sort of recording restrictions is also one of those things that really fills you with confidence. I've let this roll for so long on so many different shoots. I probably shot 400 videos with my collective 4-camera setup, and it just continues to work well. And yeah, I love the fact Panasonic are also continually updating the cameras with better firmware. So when this came out, it had class-leading full-frame image stabilization. Now it's even better. It really is. It's so good. I think after the G9 Mark II had the new electronic image stabilization, I was just blown away by that, to the point where I ended up getting one of those cameras. But it all came to the full-frame cameras. It came to the S9 and all the other cameras since. And the E-stabilization, while it does crop in slightly, will give you such great results. Anytime I'm shooting, say, a guitar shop walkthrough, for example, I'm using the S5 Mark II, or X, whichever one, with the E-stabilization set to standard, and it saves me so much time. As I've said on a few videos, a couple of years back I went to Florida to shoot 7 or 8 videos around the different guitar shops in the state there with the Sony FX3 and A7S3. Now, those cameras have their benefits, uncropped 60p, and they've got 4K at 120 frames per second, but the end result looked better out of the S5 Mark II because I didn't have to stabilize everything in post-production. So if you like to simplify your workflow, these cameras are excellent. There's a couple of other things I really love about this camera. We get a full-size HDMI port on the side. So if I'm working with a switcher or showcasing something in real time, maybe shooting a live band or my band or doing something like that, I can have all of these connected to a switcher with full-size HDMI, which really simplifies the setup. We also get USB-C power delivery. Now, unlike the S5 Mark IIX, this doesn't have SSD recording capability, but for the most part, I don't find myself using it unless I'm in a studio situation like this, or if I need to shoot Apple ProRes, which this also doesn't have. But you can shoot all the way up to 6K with this. It's got 422 10-bit, a lot of 420 10-bit codecs as well, which are a lot easier to edit on your computer than 422 10-bit. And now we've also got MP4 Lite, which was a feature that was not available on this at launch. We first saw that on the LUMIX S9. Now it's come to the rest of the range of cameras, at least in the current lineup with phase detection autofocus. The S5 Mark II is an absolute pleasure to shoot with. I love the grip. I love the ergonomics. I love having an S&Q dial on the top here. It really is a simple camera to use, and unlike something like the GH6 or 7 or even the GH5 where you'd have to set up your variable frame rate mode and switch it into a different mode and save a custom mode, all that kind of stuff, S&Q mode really simplifies this, and it still holds its own in 2025 to the point where I can't see this really getting any better for my situation shooting in a multi-camera setup. These are so good. And if you're looking for the full frame look and you want great autofocus, active cooling, this is kind of like the big brother to the GH5 in many ways. It really is. It has that kind of experience behind the camera where it feels great to use. It has all the tools you could want. You can fully customize it. I think this is a really underrated camera for both photography and video. And while it does have a 24 megapixel sensor, which isn't as high res as say something like the new S1RII Mark II, you're saving yourself a fortune. And being that this has handheld high resolution mode, you can get such beautiful images out of this where it compiles a whole bunch of images in camera and just blows it up to like a 100 megapixel image. So you've got that capability there if you want. Low light performance on the S5 Mark II is great, whether you're shooting in the standard picture profiles or in Vlog. You can get so much out of this. And speaking of Vlog, I haven't even mentioned it, but if you plan on shooting with Vlog with this camera, the image out of it is beautiful. You get 14 plus stops of dynamic range just straight out of that profile, which gives you a really beautiful image that you can sort of color grade however you like. If you're shooting a short film or if you plan on doing YouTube, I can highly recommend this as the camera to buy. It's super reliable, and again, for the price, it's pretty much unmatched when you talk about its feature set, its codecs, and the end result. When the S5 Mark II came out, a lot of the comments I would see was, oh, there's not enough lenses for the L mount. I think a lot of people don't look at how many lenses there are. There's so many. There's hundreds now. It's crazy between the likes of LUMIX, Sigma, Leica, and all the third-party brands. You can find a lens that works for you. There's also a bunch of really great, affordable anamorphic cine lenses from the likes of S1RII as well, which are fantastic, and I've covered a lot of them on the channel as well. This is another reason why the S5 Mark II really shines. You can get really affordable zoom lenses like the 20 to 60 kit lens, or even the 18 to 40, which I think is just a little overpriced actually, but the 20 to 60 kit lens is so good. It's by far my favorite kit lens for any system. It's great. It's better than the Micro Four Thirds counterparts. In my opinion, the image quality looks great. It feels like $1 million, and it's not $1 million, and you can get that with most of the camera bodies. And if you're just getting started, it's a great lens to work out what focal lengths you like, because 20mm is super wide. It's great for those wide angle shots, great for photography, great for vlogging, great for travel, all that kind of stuff. And you get all the way into 60mm, which is tighter than that nifty 50 or anywhere in between. So it's a very versatile zoom lens that I take with me anytime I travel. It's actually my #1 lens used on the S9 when I go on my trips. But anytime I need a good zoom lens, even for the S5 Mark II, I'm taking that 20 to 60mm kit. The primes are where this system really shines. The S series from LUMIX are killer. They've got really well-controlled focus breathing. There's no additional crops required on the camera to compensate for bad lens design or anything like that. Optically, they're basically the same all the way from the 18mm all the way up to the 85. While I have tested out the 100mm lens and also some of their super zooms and larger 24 to 70s, I think this system really shines with the S series of primes. They're actually smaller and lighter than some of these G Master lenses. Sure, they're not going to have the same sort of features, but optically they're better because they don't have as much focus breathing and they're very consistent. Every lens is the same size and weight, and I think that's kind of important when you're talking about a series of lenses. But that's maybe just me. Let's talk about a few of the nitpicks I have, starting with the way the movie mode interacts with the S and Q dial on this camera. So if I'm in movie mode, I'm shooting 4K at 25 frames per second, and then I switch to S and Q, I'm shooting 4K at 60, which sounds fine, right? But if I go into S and Q mode in the menu and change it to full HD at 120 frames per second, when I switch back on the dial to movie mode, I'm down to HD 1080p instead of where I was at 4K. I hope this can be addressed on a firmware update at some point in the future. Secondly, it also keeps the shutter speed. So for example, if I'm in S and Q mode, I need a bit more light, I'll set the shutter to 360 degrees instead of 180. When I go back to movie mode, it's still at 360 degrees. I don't love how this is kind of connected in this way. I can't find anywhere in the menu to separate this. So if you want to work within its limitations, you can set up your S and Q mode the way you want it and set a custom 1, 2, or 3 to your main frame rate. So as you get out of S and Q mode, you can go back to C1 and it will remember the setting you had it saved on. It's a bit of a workaround. It's not the end of the world, but it's definitely worth mentioning. A lot of folks who have used Sony cameras like the FX3 and A7S3 have complained about how the rolling shutter performance on this camera looks compared to their cameras. And that might be true. This might have more rolling shutter than some of those higher end cameras. But you know what? You can buy 2 or 3 of these now for the price of an FX3. And if you're shooting in a studio, if you're shooting a short film, or if you're doing any sort of wedding, how often are you doing these quick whip pans like this? And this is one of those things I don't really understand, the big sort of drama around rolling shutter. Now, if you're a photographer doing sports, it's a big deal. I totally get that. But if you're shooting video, I've never had an issue with this shooting short films, events, or anything with the S5 Mark II or X. The rolling shutter performance isn't a problem for me personally. And this comes from hands-on experience with this camera, the FX3 and A7S3. At the end of the day, the image quality is either going to look good or it isn't. So these kind of like minor nitpicks might apply to the minority of people in that sort of 5% that might require the fastest readout. But for everyone else, this camera will do an excellent job. In terms of how this camera feels in the hand, it's inspiring to shoot with. And if you've picked up a Lumix camera, one of the best things about it is how it feels. It feels like it can withstand weather. None of the ports or doors are creaky or feel cheap and plasticky like some of the other brands, headphone jacks, for example. Everything is built really well. And I would have no problems recommending this for someone who's a serious shooter or someone who's looking to get into doing something like this and have all the tools that they could need. If you're a fan of OpenGate and you want all of the best video tools at your disposal, excellent stabilization, and really great image quality, I think the S5 Mark II might be the best value camera on the market. But let us know what you think. Thanks again for watching. My name's Shane. I will catch you on the next one. See ya.